So this week's location and theme, the location I'm at is West Main's Allotments, and we can take allotments, gardens and so on as a theme. So as I'd always encourage you to do when arriving somewhere new, I've started just with some thumbnail sketches. Been looking in different directions. It's a fantastic location actually. We've got Arthur Seat in the distance in this direction and Blackfoot Hill in the other, and these just wonderfully characterful allotment plots. So as usual there's too much, much too much. It's kind of overwhelming, and I think the best way to start with that then is I'm using some charcoal and chalk. I've got grey paper and I've just started to make a few thumbnail sketches. So I looked in this direction towards Arthur Seat and saw some of the little sheds and cabins, and then some of the patterns, the rhythms of the way that these plots are arranged. So this, next to this shed, we've got some pots, and then I love these plastic bottles suspended on top of sticks. And I chose that view firstly because I thought I might like to include Arthur's Seat in a composition. What I see actually when I look around these plots is two things. There's structure, so often with the pathways between the plots, the rectangular beds, and the structures, the physical structures like the sheds and cabins and so on, and the frames with nettings. So there's a great deal of structure within any view that you look at, and then within those structures we've got these amazing patterns and rhythms of repeated lines of crops, or the way that people edge their plots and so on. So structure and pattern or rhythm is a thing I think that's very helpful, and something that you want to bring into your drawings. So that's what I would do with this particular view, and I ought to think really what I was interested in including Arthur's Seat, but what else do I want to think about with this view? I think the fact that I've got some of the pathway gives me a little bit of perspective, helps with the distance. I did actually like what was happening with this shed behind. It's going to be a smaller part of my composition, but there's a whole pattern again of dark leaves against a white sheet. So that's one possibility. So here's another view that I've started to look at. As I've said, there's so much, it can be quite overwhelming. So I think the first thing to do is to try out a number of different viewpoints, look in different directions, wander around. For those of you who aren't actually going to come to the location, I will be taking lots of photographs, and I'll provide you with a whole set of images to work with. But even with the photographs, I think it's good to start by doing some of these thumbnails and trying to just decide. Firstly, you've got to simplify because you're working small, and then you've got to decide what you find interesting, what you want to work with. So working small, you've got to simplify, and you've got to learn to leave things out. So I liked this view because it was open. There are the houses in the distance which I'm just going to ignore, so I've kind of cropped my composition to not include them. I've worked a bit with the charcoal. I've got some nice perspective as well with the dark earth of the beds. I've got these converging lines which help create some depth, some perspective, and I suppose it's overall a kind of diagonal arrangement. That's what attracted me. So I'll try a little bit of chalk. Even the polythene has got a certain attraction. I'll be able to put colour in as well if I want, but I think just trying to sort it out into light and dark using the charcoal and the chalk is a good way to begin. So with this view it would be helpful to use colour, as I say, but I think it's probably quite good that I don't use colour, otherwise I'll get a bit complicated. And really what I'm trying to do is sort out what to include, what to leave out. And I'll be drawn to certain things. We've got these little labels setting up a pattern down there. We've got flowers down here. So there's lots I want to put in, but when I do it on this scale, that'll oblige me to simplify. And if I'm not using colour, another thing I might become more aware of is just texture. So I'm putting in something for the grass in the foreground and using texture, tone, just to create that simplified study. So I really haven't had to go far at all to find all sorts of exciting possibilities. So I've just moved along slightly here, and I think I was struck by the wheelbarrow actually. But again, there's this great framework structure. We've got the polytunnel here, and then a number of layers really. So although this is, the last one I was working with had that sort of diagonal arrangement with some converging lines, but here it's much more like layers. We're actually looking through layers of netting and framework, going, kind of across the composition, but gradually receding into the distance. So that I would find interesting as well. We've got St. Crispin's School building in the background, but I don't think I'll include that. I might go straight from the polytunnel and some of these other structures to a bit of sky. So I'm looking for interesting arrangements and then what's inside them. And again, we've got some of these bottles. It's the same plot with the plastic bottles under the netting. So a series of thumbnail sketches is helping me narrow down what I'm interested in. I'll do one more and then I'll start working with some ink. So here's one more. I thought working from this blue shed and using that as a kind of reference. It's got a little bit of perspective on the boards. But what I wanted to show here, which is another feature of these allotments and others as well, is the fact that the plots are on a bit of a hill. So I've got a little shed up here in the distance, which is higher up. And then again, these kind of layers coming down. I don't mind admitting I've got a little bit lost with this one. It's a bit confusing. And I'm sure a bit of colour would sort it out. But again, I could think in terms of what I'm going to select of these beds, these raised beds, these boxes, using some of their perspective, and also, of course, what I'm going to leave out, and what textures I could introduce. The other thing actually about this view is it's quite nice, it's looking into the light. So I quite like to work against the light, get some silhouetted shapes. Okay, so these are my studies, and I think I might go for the second one, which was this sort of open view through the beds. and I'm going to set up to do some work with ink and wash and then apply colour to that. So this is the view that I've decided to develop. I've got some white cartridge paper and I've got a bottle of ink and a sharpened stick, and I'm probably going to do two versions of the same view. The first one I'm going to do using the stick and the ink and working with firstly a bit of a line drawing. So as I'd said, what I saw when I was doing my thumbnail sketches was this kind of diagonal arrangement of the beds. So that's where I'm starting. I'm already feeling it's going to be easy to get lost. But I think the ink is, I love using the ink because it makes you very decisive. But I think as well, because I think one of the kind of characteristics of allotments might be a certain organised chaos, can we call it that? So a medium like ink, which won't always behave exactly as you want. Notice those drips and blobs can actually be quite helpful, I think. Firstly for making you decisive, but maybe for getting something of the character of these places. So there's a few things that I've identified as part of my scene. Got the perspective of the rectangular beds, and we've got two of these sort of compost bins. So I'm starting with a line, a nice varied fluid line, which is what you get with a stick. If you want the ink to flow, then you point the stick down the way. If you want to slow the flow, then you don't have it going quite so far down. So I'm really trying to go from place to place around my scene and hopefully making things join up. If things don't join up, I won't tell if you won't tell. So I'm getting my main elements, the greenhouse, the compost bins, we've got this path coming across the beds. So it is quite a challenge with the ink, because as you know you can't rub the ink out, so you're a little bit stuck with what you put down, but that is part of the point of using it. I'll also next do a drawing where I start with the wash, and sometimes that can be a little bit easier because you've got to look with your eyes half closed and just see where the dark shapes are, and the dark shapes will be probably these beds, the dark of the earth in the beds. It's not a bad thing to have to limit yourself to the line that you get from the stick and start to see where things join up. But everything that I do here is eventually going to have some colour on top, some pastel, so things can be changed. And what you can do very nicely with the stick as well is texture. So I've referred to that already, the kinds of patterns that the different plants make, or the leaves, or the other sort of allotment furniture. You know, there's a certain pattern that you can start to create with your stick. And I think it matters that we've got another bed down here. So that's probably what I'll do for that one. I'll pause and change my paper. I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to do a wash one, maybe a slightly different arrangement. So I'll try the same view, but I'll do it portrait this time. So I've got some wash in a little container here. So the wash is dilute ink, and I've got a piece of sponge. and the fact that I'm against the light is quite helpful, I think, because I can look with my eyes half closed and see some dark shapes. So let's say this is compost bin for one. So working with a bit of sponge, inevitably, and that's the idea, I don't have that much control. So it's just helping me put down some of the dark shapes. There's the compost bin, and then here is some of the earth. So again, it's a great way to make you look differently. So look just to see shapes and also texture. There's a lot I can do just dabbing. So I'm trying to leave that white bit there for the polythene. And then this should come over here. Things aren't quite in the right place. That's these, I don't know what they are, something up on a trestle. That's that one there, and then my greenhouse, some dark windows, and then that's probably all quite dark up there with the trees. So, you know, when you've got to just draw the shapes and the dark shapes, and they're not all obvious, then I think that will give you something a little bit incomplete, but something that's usually really satisfying to then draw into, to draw some lines into. And if nothing else, my white paper has now got something on it which I can work against. I'll try to think about grass. So that's the wash. It's often more interesting to start with a wash, I think. But I'll put that to dry in the sunshine as well, and I'll go back to my first one and start putting on some wash to my ink lines. Well, it's so sunny and warm that hopefully my ink has begun to dry. I don't think it's all dry, but I'm going to do to my ink line drawing what I was doing to my wash drawing. Eyes half closed. You can see where some of the dark shapes are. And again, it's the compost bins, it's the earth of the allotment plots, and maybe it's some of the dark areas of leaves. When this is dry, I'm going to put pastel on top. So again, I'm not tied to anything in particular. I can always put some lighter pastel onto things and they'll stand out quite well as a result. Some of the ink isn't completely dry, so that might mean that I pick up some of the dark of the pure ink and there's a kind of bleed, but that's fine. I'm not sure what's happening back there, so I think I'm going to make a lot of it just dark. As we look into the light, it'd be nice to get some lighter pastels into that. And maybe, because this is going to be grass, I want to have something, a bit of texture. And actually, although that is a bit of white polythene, it might be good to get something on it that I can put some light onto. Okay, I'm quite happy with that one. So I'll swap back to the first. So I'm now going to draw some lines into the wash one. And actually what I quite like about the wash one is it's pretty delicate. the wash isn't very strong, so instead of drawing with pure ink, I'm drawing with some slightly darker wash. So I've added I've added maybe only one drop of pure ink to the wash. So it is darker than what I started with, but it's not the sudden jump that you get when you work with undiluted ink. And that's because I want to hang on to some of the delicate quality of the first wash shapes. That was my bin. And then here we've got the same sort of trestle structure with things growing. So that's the opposite way of doing things, starting with the wash, starting with shapes. And of course those shapes aren't always in the right place, but it really doesn't matter too much. All you need to do is redraw. So I'm using the lines now to define, for example, where the greenhouse is. And if the tonal shapes I put down with the wash aren't exactly right underneath, that tends not to matter. It tends to add a certain amount of depth and interest to the whole process. So that would be what to do next. So there's another way of approaching it, and I certainly recommend you try both. You try lines first, let them dry and put on the wash, and you try wash first and then introduce the lines. And when you introduce the lines second, often what you find is you can do less. You've already got so much explained, defined through your wash shapes that you can be more economical in the way that you define using the line. So that would be a next step. I'll let this one dry and then put some colour on it as well. And I would suspect with this one, because I'm trying to do something a bit more delicate, I might do less colour as a general kind of more economical way of working. And then maybe into these beds I now see a pattern of crops. And there's just so many different ideas. It's great. There's different textures and patterns. Okay, I'll pause again and go back to the other one and try some colour. I got out my colour and the sun went in. So working with colour, I think the best thing to do is to try and start with some fairly kind of general areas. So we've got all the grassy pathways around the beds, so I might start with that. So going for big shapes, big areas in colour, and just putting the colour down fairly loosely is a good idea, and it might reinforce some of your original ideas about structure. What are the main shapes? You can also put charcoal on. So the charcoal over the wash is quite a nice way of adding contrast, but it's something that you can change quite easily. I think I need just a bit more. So there were lines that didn't quite come through, what I'm now deciding I want. And then I'm going to put in the other big area. I think is this pattern of beds. I'm getting a bit of brown into them. The wash gives the surface of the paper a really nice tooth, so it will pick up the pastel well. And I was thinking of sky, but I haven't really got to sky. What I've got a lot of really is some lovely bright and light greens coming through, where the light sort of catches things. It's almost a yellow light that I want to put on. So that would be my next stage, getting areas of colour and starting with something general. Don't know why that's not coming off. And then gradually looking at what it is I'm trying to draw attention to, make my focus of attention. And this is, I suppose I've worked mainly so far on some of the main large areas, and I'll then be starting to look at what actually happens when I get into these flower beds or to the things growing on these structures. So that's putting colour onto the line first, wash second. I suppose the more I think about it, there's quite a lot of greys and things that I need to work with in the greenhouse. And so that's where I'd go with that one. And let's have a quick look at the other one, just to see how I do anything different. So what I've been doing here then, I suppose, is using colour to reinforce the structure that I first found. The grassy paths and the beds in between. And having done that, I can then start to go back to things which you could be described much more as detail. If I want to make something of the flowers in the beds, or some of these plants growing over the frames, then in a way I've gone from using the side of the pastel and smudging things to now using the tip of the pastel to start to draw brighter, stronger colour. And it's a much slower process now, but it's a process of choosing things to develop and to bring out, and it perhaps relates to what I saw at the beginning when I chose a particular view. Because there were things that I wanted to draw attention to, the pattern of certain plants, certain colours and so on. Okay, so I hope that's all going to be useful for you. I'll take plenty of photographs for those who aren't able to come to the location, and hopefully on Monday we'll have another glorious day like today. Okay, well I'll see you either at the location or online. Cheerio.